and we will be recording for those who could not join it. So if you want to watch it again later, we will be sending out a link with that. Before we jump into our presentation here, I'd just like to do a few introductions so that you can associate some faces with names. So my name is Gail Zembel. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District. And I'm going to list off a few names, and once I call your name, just give a wave. And if you want to see everybody at once, there is a little way that you can show grid view. So if you hover over your picture, if you're on a laptop or a desktop, there should be a little grid icon that you can click and show more people. But I will introduce our district administrator.
By the way, Gail, you can't do that while you're sharing your screen.
Oh, thanks, John. Why don't I stop sharing then? And then we can introduce people, and then we can go to the presentation. So our district administrator, Randy Anhorn. And we also have our program and project manager, Erica Snigowski. And permit and water resources coordinator, Lauren Foley. And we have really long titles, I'm sorry. Natural resources project and planning manager, Brett Idom. And then we also have our intern, Lizzie. Thanks, Lizzie. I'd also like to introduce our managers right now. We have, I believe, 4 of the 5 managers, but if I miss somebody, let me know. Our chair, Bob Cutshall, is on. Hi, Bob. And then manager Grace Butler. And manager Larry Olson. And manager Peggy Kwam. There we are. Awesome. Did I miss any of the managers, or we got all of them that are here? I think so. Manager Hunker is not able to make it to the beginning part of this tonight. She is hopefully joining us a little later. I'd also like to thank all of our consultants that have helped us on so many projects over the years, not just the ones you'll hear about tonight. We have many, many other projects in the works and in the past, and we are very thankful for the help of all of our consultants on those projects. Just to give you a quick rundown, I will share my screen again so that you can see. We will be having about a half-hour presentation on some of our goldfish work that's been going on in the past few years, and there will be some time for questions. I encourage you to submit them into the chat whenever, and then as we get to that point, I will read the questions out to Jordan, and hopefully we'll get through them all. And then we will also look ahead to some of the projects that we're going to be doing in 2022. And we'll go from there. So hopefully we'll be done by 8. And thank you again so much for joining us on this virtual Zoom State of the Waters event. So moving right along, I would like to introduce Jordan from WSB. Jordan Wein has been with WSB since July of 2019, but he's been working on carp projects since 2009, give or take a few years, as a hiatus through the Peace Corps. His goldfish work actually really started with 9 Mile Creek Watershed in Carver County in 2020, but the work and the fascination with the problem sparked a new passion and getting the word out about the effect of introducing non-native fish to the natural environment. So he's been working a lot with us on goldfish work, carp work, and we thought it would be interesting to share some of the recent information and give you a chance to let you know what we're doing in some of the local lakes in your backyard. So with that, I will turn it over to Jordan.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for the introduction. Board managers, 9 Mile Creek staff, and all you concerned citizens, thanks for inviting me to your meeting tonight. My name is Jordan Wein, and I work for WSB, and I'm really excited to talk to you today about the results on the Cornelia carp and goldfish assessment, mostly goldfish, as the second year came around, with results to look to the future. And without further ado, we'll look at some of those results. So here we are. You guys all understand 9 Mile Creek Watershed District as a whole, but we want to zoom in a little bit to look at the Cornelia system here. Cornelia Lake and some of those surrounding water bodies there are where our story begins. And specifically, we're going to start with North and South Cornelia, the Cornelia Lake itself. And we're going to look at some data that started before we got involved. And this is in 2005. This is some data that shows some fisheries surveys done by the Minnesota DNR. And just to kind of show what the history sort of looks like with concerns about the fisheries in the lake itself. So the main takeaways, there's a lot of information on this, but you can see that there's lots of carp. At this point, there's only 2 goldfish, and there's actually a decent amount of species diversity with lots of crappies, species, and other sunfish and yellow perch. So things actually look pretty nice back then. Then we move ahead to 2010. You zoom in again, you see there are fewer carp surveyed, and there's a couple more goldfish, but there's a precipitous drop in things like crappie and your sunfish species, and there's 0 bluegill sunfish. Which is concerning, and there's a lot of bullhead. So you can kind of see there's a little bit of a shift going on with the species and the species diversity. Looking at all the way up to 2019, you can zoom in, and carp aren't even in that box anymore. They're not sampled, and there's a small number of bluegill, but there's abundant green sunfish, black bullhead, and overall, looking at these 3 surveys, the trend seems to favor species that are low oxygen tolerant, like green sunfish and bullhead and goldfish. And I'm actually interested in wondering, and still haven't figured out why there's that drop in carp, but we do see nowadays that there are other concerns. And that brought in a survey that 9 Mile Creek wanted to do and get a little bit more investigation on this for the start of a feasibility study. And this is clearly focused around North and South Cornelia, but some of these peripheral water bodies, they wanted to know also what's in those areas. So they called on some friends at Riley Purgatory Bluff Creek Watershed District, and they came in and they set some small mesh trap nets. They conducted a small number of electrofishing on boats and their efforts to sample the bodies a little more thoroughly than the DNR does. And these bodies included Swimming Pool Pond, Lake Nancy, Point of France Pond, as well as North and South Cornelia. And you can see that goldfish were present in numbers that suggested an overabundance in all lakes all bodies except for Point of France. Interestingly enough, that water body was the only one that had an abundance of carp. And as you can see by the picture, these goldfish that they were sampling in North and South Cornelia aren't your normal Petco goldfish. So it seems there's a problem. And now kind of taking a step back, it's well known that carp are bad, common carp, but what's wrong with goldfish? What's the issue with those? And it turns out that, carp are well known and have been studied in the lab, in the field pretty extensively, especially in the last 10 to 20 years. And there's been heavy investment to spent on their management and understanding how to get rid of them. But goldfish are their close relatives, and they share a lot in common with their behaviors, and specifically their foraging behavior. And we look at the data, and there's actually not much that exists, especially around the Midwest area here, and definitely not Minnesota. And what is known is mostly out of lab studies. So we can see it's quickly becoming a problem, especially in the metro. And you can imagine why. There's with that many more people, and there's just that many more opportunities for introduction of invasive species, especially one that is typically a pet that is willing to be surrendered and in unfortunate ways. And it got to be such a big problem that the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center through the University of Minnesota has it now listed on their priority list of concern. And what we know is that finally that these goldfish are some of the toughest fish out there, especially when it comes to survival ability. We know about fish kills in our lakes happens every once in a while, or sometimes it's pretty often. And this is usually due to a lack of dissolved oxygen over the winter or during hot times in the summer. But goldfish seem to be able to outlast almost any of these other fish. And they can even use physiological techniques in survival mode to essentially survive without dissolved oxygen at all, which when these conditions occur, the only fish basically that can survive sometimes are goldfish. And like many other invasive species, these goldfish can take advantage of the lack of predators and the lack of other fish to compete with and take over a water body. So when we came in contact with WSB, came in contact with 9 Mile Creek, we put together a study that had 4 main objectives. And the first one is estimate the population of goldfish and carp. It started off, carp is just as important. We wanted to know about that. Number 2, we wanted to monitor the movement between and within water bodies. And we wanted to, number 3, analyze the recruitment history and identify any nurseries. And just to back up a little bit for definition's sake here, recruitment refers to when an adult population of fish, in this particular case, is reproducing, or they're spawning, they're laying eggs, and these eggs become viable fish, and those fish grow up and survive and eventually get pulled into the main population, essentially recruiting those little fish into the main population of fish. That's the replenishment of that species over and over again, is kind of known as recruitment. And sometimes it happens on an annual, yearly basis. Sometimes it's every few years. But also understanding the nurseries are just places where these adult fish seem to have very good success at producing surviving young fish of their species. So, and the fourth part is testing biomass reduction options, things that are cost effective and frankly, just at the very least effective, and seeing if there's ways that we can actually remove some of these fish to improve water quality and the fisheries in general in the lake. So the meat and potatoes of this study starts with electrofishing surveys. So we did 3 days of electrofishing surveys on each of Lake Nancy, Swimming Pool Pond, and both North and South Cornelia. And all goldfish, and at that time carp, were counted. They were given a mark and released into the lake again. And these marks consisted of either a pelvic fin clip, so we cut a little piece of their fin off that doesn't really affect their behavior, or a pit tag, and I'll explain that in just one second. But on the second and third subsequent surveys, when we go out to sample, all those fish were checked for previous marks. And what that does is actually allows us to see how many of the recaptured fish have marks that we put on them in the first or second surveys. And that can really be a robust way of estimating the population when you have sufficient numbers of recaptured fish. And this is a picture of a recaptured fish that is starting to grow back that fin that we clipped in an earlier time. So I mentioned a pit tag. What is a pit tag? That sounds weird. It's actually not as weird as you think. What we're seeing here on the left picture is kind of the setup we have as we catch the fish. A pit tag is short for passive integrated transponder. And essentially it's an RFID tag that gets implanted inside the fish with a syringe, pops in really easily, and then the fish is really no worse for the wear. And then they're released, and that tag just kind of lives inside the body of the fish, and it doesn't have batteries. And so it never runs out of batteries. But what happens is you can see here, the antenna you can see on the right side is run by a box, and it has a battery, and it's powered by a solar panel to charge that battery. And this is in Lake Nancy, as if the fish were to leave the lake, they would cross by that PVC antenna. Inside that's a wire that as that fish gets in close proximity, that exact fish number gets recorded on a computer, and it's also time and date stamped for when it crossed that antenna, or at least it approaches it. So we chose 4 different places that were between places that we were concerned of. For example, on the left side, you can see the 4 red dots there. There's the Nancy Lake antenna on top, the North Cornelia antenna that would be picking up fish that would be coming from Nancy into North Cornelia. There's a one that's labeled Swimming Pool Pond antenna, and that would be picking up fish either trying to make their way into swimming pool from North Cornelia, or vice versa, swimming pool into North Cornelia. And then we also wanted to see how many fish are maybe moving back and forth between North and South Cornelia basins. And on the right side is a picture of one of our antennas out there. Like I said, it's powered by a solar panel, which charges a deep cycle battery and runs everything off the grid. So it's running 24/7. And anytime that it's out there, as long as there's enough power to run it. And basically during all the way from the spring all the way to the late fall and early winter, that we get enough sun to run these without having to have them powered. But also, not only do we want to know if the fish are moving between lakes, which is how the pit antennas would really give us a great idea of that happening, we also wanted to learn kind of a late development and a new technique for Minnesota goldfish, as far as I know, is putting radio transmitters on the fish. Now, these fish, although they are big relatively for goldfish, They're not as big as carp, which would be, those fish are so big that you can make an incision and implant them inside the body and then sew them up and release them, and they heal up and do just fine. But those radio tags are pretty big, and for the size they would be for this goldfish, it just wasn't going to work out. So we decided to find another option that you actually mount them on the outside of the fish, and it's kind of wearing it like a backpack, as you can see in the picture here. And those will last about a year. If we're lucky, maybe a little bit more, and we can keep tracking those fish. And we use what's called radiotelemetry, and that means we can hone in on each individual frequency of each individual fish and find each individual fish's exact locations. We just have to get a little close to it, maybe within a football field before we can start picking them up. Now, we want to do this because for a couple of reasons. You can see we want to identify exact locations, like I said, within the lake, so we know what parts of the lake they use. It can also help us identify aggregations, which is a carp sort of behavior. Since they're closely related, we wanted to wonder if they get together in groups in cold times, like especially in the winter, like what we're doing out here, checking them under the ice. And we wanted to also eventually in the springtime, if we want to learn where the spawning areas are, we can actually follow these fish. And if they're using places in the lake to spawn, this may be the best way to find out where those places are. So it's a pretty cool development. Another big part, like I mentioned a little bit, we want to know what's the history of recruitment in these lakes. Basically, understanding the different ages of the goldfish in these systems is important to making long-term plans for management. You can imagine if there's lots of age class represented out of, say, a sample of 50 or 100 fish, that probably means that you're going to have fish that are successfully surviving every year or on most years. On the contrary, if you only see a couple of ages represented out of 50 or 100 fish, that means that really only there's a seldom times that fish are being reintroduced and kind of rebounding from kills or removal periods. So this would help us to understand how often we're going to have to do removals of goldfish and how fast they're going to be able to come back, on average at least. Oh, and just to mention, this is a picture of an otolith. It's an inner ear bone of the goldfish. It helps them orient themselves in the water. And if you remove them and you put them under a microscope, you can actually see these growth checks that correspond to each year of growth. So this picture, for example, is a goldfish that's 6 years old. You can kind of see those different shaded areas, and it's a really accurate way of finding out how old the fish is. Another way we want to find out about recruitment is individually this year in particular. So we set what we call young of year. Those are fish that are spawned this summer or spring that are very small. And so they're less than 1 year old. And we want to see if essentially some of these potential nurseries like Lake Nancy or Swimming Pool Pond are full of little baby goldfish this year. So we set these trap nets out, and if they are in high abundance, we would see a lot of goldfish caught in these traps. We used up to 5 traps in each water body, and like I said, we did those in Lake Nancy, Swimming Pool Pond, and North and South Cornelia here in 2021. And then finally, what we've all been waiting for, how do we get rid of them? If we know that they're, what do we do? So there's lots of options that managers can use to get rid of invasive fish, and all options have their strengths and weaknesses. For example, draining a water body can be difficult, and especially to keep it low enough that essentially that will kill off all the fish that you're trying to get rid of, especially very hardy ones like goldfish and carp. Chemical poisoning is clearly not selective at all. It's expensive, and it has obvious aesthetic issues with residents, understandably. Biological control, that can be interesting to try. And when it comes to reestablishing the native fisheries, that actually has to be a part of long-term management. And clearly the goal that we would want these lakes to return to is a balanced native fisheries. But it likely has to be built in with a plan that it's only a part of. But we do find that lakes with abundant, diverse size classes of, say, bluegill sunfish have been found to be very effective predators of eggs and larvae of goldfish and carp. So if you find places where there's lots of them, generally you don't find any recruitment happening of goldfish and carp. So that can be a really important thing to think about for the future. And that brings us basically to physical removal. And this is the one we wanted to test for this project. And we used a method we called baited box net trapping. And what that does is it baits fish into an aggregation instead of going after them. And they come to you, and then we use those in lakes where it's appropriate. Manager Olson, I think you'll probably recognize this. This is in your backyard in South Cornelia. We used North and South Cornelia to test these options. And like I said, this is a net that kind of looks like an upside down batting cage when you have the walls raised. But generally this is laying on the bottom of the lake, and that allows for all fish to swim over the top of it, and there's no entanglement. So there's very little impact to the fish when you're not actively using it. But when you want to, you bait fish in with cracked corn is generally a bait that's specific to carp and goldfish. Native fish don't seem to be really attracted to it. And so when they group up on top of your bait, you pull up the outside walls with some ropes and some poles around the outside, and they are trapped on the inside. And then you roll them kind of to a corner, and then you can dip them out with a net or roll them into a boat. And then if there's any non-target fish, it's really easy to just put them back in the water, and there's no real big issues. But we did find it to be pretty successful. And with that, let's dive into some results. So looking at the pit antenna summary, basically I'll just kind of point out the main takeaways from these. The top two rows there are showing our analysis from 2020, which was the first year of this project. And those antennas didn't go in until after July 1st. And that usually is after the spring spawning period. So there may have been some movement that weren't picked up. So that may be a reason some of their kind of low detection rate from the number of fish that were tagged in those lakes. But then if we look to 2021, we got those in before that spawning migrations would have happened, right at ice out basically. And you can see that the numbers of tags being detected throughout 2021 went up, and that's great. So we're had a good chance to see if there were any big movements of fish from other lakes between lakes. Generally, the take-home point is overall, we're not seeing a whole lot of fish moving between multiple water bodies, or even not many moving from one body to the next. And especially the two presumed or suspected or tested nurseries being Nancy Lake and Swimming Pool Pond. We did have two fish that were detected in North Cornelia from Nancy. So that shows that it is possible to make their way down into the lake. It didn't seem like there was a big flushing of fish, at least for these 2 years so far. We will be monitoring these pit antennas through the spring of 2022. So there will be kind of a follow-up with that data to come, which will be very interesting. But this was all actually good results so far to show that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of movement we have to be worried about so far. What the end results will come by the end of the spring. And a couple of the graphs I just kind of picked out. These two I thought were very interesting. The pit detections on the top graph, those are shown. I know it's really kind of tough to see, but the blue lines show the number of the unique individual tagged fish that were detected on each individual day. And what you can see in the orange is a precipitation level for that day as well. So a nearby monitoring station showed how much rainfall happened on that day. And the interesting thing is, especially on that top graph, you can see that they do seem to line up with movement patterns along with precipitation that's falling. So that's interesting. That tells us something that we kind of suspected, but didn't have good hard data to show it. And you can understand also the top graph where there's no detections at all from the 27th of May all the way until the 23rd of August. And that, of course, was because the creeks were basically dry for that period of time. We had such a drought that fish physically couldn't move between those parts. But the bottom graph is the antenna that was between North and South Cornelia. And even though the water was very low at that time, there was still the ability to move through if they chose to. But so yeah, we saw some fish moving. Most of those tags were from the original place that they were implanted. So we're not seeing a whole lot of intermovement between lakes. And so far, early results from the radio telemetry. Here is a map showing the locations. So the blue diamonds on there are the locations where the 5 from each basin were released. That's why they're grouped up really tight. And then a few months later, in January 24th, you can see where those fish were then located at that point. So again, this is pretty early to tell the patterns yet, but it's encouraging to show that the tags are working and they're detectable, and we can hopefully continue to track them through the winter and into the spring, and we'll see how long we can continue to detect them with the batteries that are on there. But interesting results for sure. This is a little bit confusing in the sense of you've got carp and goldfish on here. Originally, we did catch some carp in 2020. 2020. And so we did find out the ages of those, as well as a sample of goldfish that we kept from Lake Nancy and from Cornelia as well. And you can see that there are kind of some there, especially in goldfish. Unfortunately, there are multiple age classes represented here, especially 2013, 14, 15. There was a drop in 2016, but then 2017 and 18 were also big years, relatively big years for recruitment in Cornelia at least. And that also corresponds with carp for swimming pool pond. And what I do find is that it lines up with winter kills, and it does line up with the lack of stocking from the Minnesota DNR of bluegill sunfish. So interesting findings to show how that corresponds and how that informs us to go to the future with management. And this is one graph showing all of the results from this 2021 mini TrapNet survey. The interesting stuff is that swimming pool pond had the most fish by far, and it was but basically the take-home point is the fish that were sampled. The diversity again is pretty much made up of all low dissolved oxygen tolerant fish like bullhead, carp, mud minnows, goldfish, green sunfish, hybrid sunfish, and pumpkin seed are all pretty tolerant of low oxygen. You don't see any bluegill or any bass or any pike or any of that sort of those species. Interestingly enough, we weren't finding a gazillion goldfish in any of the places, which I guess is good news, but we'll see how that corresponds with seeing the results of future years. But that's I guess good news, seeing that it wasn't a huge year for recruitment so far. And then going on to the removal results, we caught, so I failed to mention that we did test this first in Lake Nancy. Marcy is on the meeting here. You probably recognize, I didn't have a picture of that, Marcy, but that was in your backyard. And we did test it. We found it's not really suitable for Lake Nancy, that method. It's just really mucky once you kind of get out into the lake and you sink pretty low. And so that's going to be a problem. But we did catch 102 goldfish with the one opportunity we had. And the important part at that point was that we did find that 3 of the larger goldfish did have some corn excreted, which means they were consuming it, which means corn was an effective bait for them. But moving on, in 2021, we tried it in North and South Cornelia, and you can see that our results were much better. Marcy, you're also in that picture. Thanks for all the help with baiting and all the other volunteers that helped and staff from 9 Mile Creek. We did pretty well. I think we placed each box net in the North and South Basin in one location, and we raised the box nets 3 or 4 times. And I think it went pretty well. In that middle picture, you can see that's a sample of the larger fish on one of the poles in South Cornelia. And those guys were all over 11 inches long, and all of them weighed more than a pound apiece. So it's interesting to see what kind of fish are out there and what you can pull up in these box nets. And so looking at just numbers for these results, this is kind of a graph showing the different poles on the different dates in the different locations, South and North Cornelia, where the first, we were getting between 300 and 600, 900 per pole in North Cornelia. South Cornelia, we got a little fewer, but I think the fish generally are a little bit bigger. So about the amount of biomass we removed of goldfish is around the same. And the lines there we're seeing is the number of recapped fish. And that means the number of goldfish that we caught that had pit tags inside them. Now we would hope for more recaps. That makes for a better mark recapture estimate. And it's a little interesting to see that there were only that few, especially having several hundred pit tags in the system. But moving on to see what that translates to the overall population estimates for each North and South Cornelia and what it means for biomass estimate. So for populations, just for that, we looked at a pre-removal period, which we did 2 electrofishing surveys before we did box netting, and we did 2 electrofishing surveys after we did box net removals. So in North Cornelia, you see it's over 8,300, and in South Cornelia, it's almost 6,000 fish were the estimated population of individuals there. And then post removal, you see we brought it down to just under 7,200 and 4,800 in North and respectively South Cornelia, which is good. We can see that there was a drop in the population and the catch per unit effort when we did those electrofishing surveys, and that brought the population, or the biomass estimate down. And what I mean by that is that's kind of an overall mass of goldfish that are in the lakes, and there's a threshold at which, at least for carp, and we're basically putting it the same for goldfish since they're so related and their behaviors are the same, of their damaging type. That goal is 89 pounds per acre, or if you went in metric, that's 100 kilograms per hectare. But you can see that green line is where that would line up, and we can see that we did bring it closer, but we've got some more progress to go to get down to the point where if we get below that green line, then that is basically a level of biomass of goldfish in the lake that would not be significantly contributing to the damaging aspects to the water quality and the fisheries. So that's the goal we want to get to. Moving on to education, we know that education has to be a part of this to make it happen. It's most likely, of course, that these fish started from a relatively small number that were introduced as unwanted pets. That means unless behaviors are changed, our management efforts could be thwarted by reintroductions. Even if we're very successful at removing a large proportion of the fish, they could just be reintroduced, and that's a problem. So efforts should continue to promote things like pet drop-offs. And that's like if you don't want your fish anymore, instead of releasing it into the pond behind your house, take it back to the pet store. Or there's also a group called Habitatitude, where they have public drop-off days of unwanted pets. That would be a much better way to release your pet that's not going to be damaging to the natural environment around you. And furthermore, we should continue to do things like educational signage around the lake. And as you see in this picture, continue engaging with the public that's around the lake while we're working on site, and just continue to find ways to reach out to mass media to get the message out. And I know we had some good press in the past couple of years, media outlets like the City of Edina TV series. There's been some national radio interviews that have contacted 9 Mile Creek and had comments from both me and 9 Mile Creek staff. And then Minnesota Bound also had a really good story that came out that goes out to the whole state. So the more people know that the after effects of just a really small, quick introduction where you don't think it's going to cause a problem, the better. So we should continue doing that. So just a quick results summary. It looks like carp at this point aren't a problem. I say that with a little discrepancy with knowing that we did catch some small carp in South Cornelia this year, which means there's a chance that there was a recruitment event, but not enough quite yet to throw up a red flag. But goldfish are a problem. And you can see from a couple slides ago that Cornelia is above that damaging threshold for the mass of goldfish that are in the lakes. Those pit antennas, they suggest at this point not that much inter-lake movement, so between lakes, which is important to know because that suggests that nurseries are not contributing a lot of recruitment events to the main population in Cornelia. Recruitment seems to be coinciding with winter kill years, and that usually is because of low dissolved oxygen. And then we see that with several age classes after we've done the aging analysis. And so that could, unfortunately, unless there's maybe some changes, mean that there should be frequent removals recommended. But if it's within the lake, we need to really find where those fish are spawning. And hopefully the radio telemetry will help us find those. And number 5, the baited box net seem to work pretty well in both North and South Cornelia lake basins. And that's an option that seems can be scaled up and used in lots of areas around the lake. And so that was an effective option. So what's next, or to follow up? We'll continue to monitor those pit antennas, at least through the spring of 2022. And like I said, the radio telemetry should continue through the fall as long as we have batteries left in those fish. Number two, we want to, again, like I said, identify those spawning areas. It's pretty important to shutting off the chances of fish coming back as quickly as they are right now. Beta boxnet efforts can be increased and continue to bring that biomass down as it has over 2021. The population estimates, like I had mentioned, it was a little low on the recapture of pit tagged fish. But this, if we continue this, that will give us more opportunities to refine and keep an eye on what that population and the biomass is each year. And then we, like I said, posting signage around the public shoreline, informing residents about the goldfish infestations and their effects, and just educating everybody to know that there's other options for surrendering their unwanted pets is really a big message that we're continuing to push out. But I'm right at my time, so I hope I have time for some questions, but thanks for the opportunity to tell you about the results.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jordan. That was a really interesting presentation. Please do put your questions into the chat. I'll read them out to Jordan, and we'll get through as many as we can in the time we have. So while that is happening, I was actually wondering about finding those spawning areas and things like that. How do you track them? Do you go out in the winter time? Do you track them through the ice? How does that work?
Yeah, you can kind of go out any of those times. It works really well right now to go out and just walk on the ice. Clearly, we've got plenty of ice that I can go and walk and cover every area in the lake. And as kind of as suspected, they're sticking to the deeper parts of both lakes. That's still only 5 or 6 feet deep in some of those places. But in the summertime, I can either jump on a canoe if I wanted to. I could get in a small john boat and go until I get close enough to that fish where I can feel really confident that I'm right in the area that they are. And you can tell within a few feet of where that fish is. And if that shows us some place we didn't think about looking in the past, that might open some eyes and be really interesting data to see.
Cool, thank you. We have a few questions coming through the chat now. Manager Olson was wondering, how are the RFID tagged goldfish doing?
Like their health or
I'm not
the
exactly
RFID?
sure. Manager Olson, maybe you can clarify.
Did you find them all? And
The radio
are they
tag?
staying in the same locations at the same basins, I guess?
Yeah, so that one slide, so instead of RFID, these are the radio telemetries. Small difference that the RFID are the pit tags.
Okay.
But radio telemetry tags, yeah, they seem to be in the same basin. I'm due to get out to track them again here in the next week or so to see where they are at this point. But so far, the 2 times I've gone out on the ice, they've been in the same basins and they've been generally kind of grouping up a bit, but not exactly right on top of each other, but they seem to all still be moving. And so that's a good sign that they're still alive and they seem well.
Great, thank you. Our next question here is, how large was the largest goldfish, either weight or lengthwise?
Well, both. I think there were a couple that went over 13 inches. And that's about the size of a dinner plate, probably. And I think those were 1.5 pounds, maybe 1.75 pounds. So those are pretty big fish, especially for a shallow, small lake. For comparison, I just did some work out in California on a 50,000 acre lake, and those fish were in the 4-pound range and about 18 inches big. So they can get bigger, but for a lake of your guys' size, those are still pretty big fish.
Wow, that is very large. Next question here is there any plan to look at the goldfish in Lone Lake in Minnetonka? And maybe Randy can jump in on this one too.
It's part of our water quality studies for these lakes that we have coming up, either during or as a recommendation from those studies. We do try to incorporate fisheries work. I don't know when we have Lone Lake's water quality study coming up. I don't have that information in front of me. Some of the lakes get rather difficult to get into to do actual electrofishing. So we end up having to do some fyke netting, I think is what they're called, Jordan, to try to see what the fisheries populations are. I'm going to have to rely on Jordan. I think you generally try to do the electrofishing and the netting together to get a more accurate idea of what's all in there and what their general populations are. I don't, but once we get to Lone Lake, we will be trying to determine what their fisheries is.
Yeah, just to chime in, yeah, Randy's right on. There are definitely places, especially with the boat that we have currently, although we do have plans by this spring to have a much more mobile boat that actually can be built on the water, that has electrofishing capabilities. It is much easier to set fyke nets or these trap nets, and that's why we did set them in the smaller lakes, but did not attempt electrofishing again in 2021. It was pretty tough to get into some of those small places. Yeah, that electrofishing is the best way to estimate population. You can kind of get an idea with trap nets, kind of presence or absence of, are there goldfish or carp here, or are there not, or at least get some of that data, which is pretty easy to come by relatively, but if it's at all possible, electrofishing is the best way to go about it.
Okay, thank you. We'll do one last question here quick. This person says, we have no fewer than 4 bald eagles and they enjoy eating the goldfish. Many goldfish heads in my yard by the west side of the South Lake Cornelia. Any concerns about bald eagles or any other predators with the testing? Poisoning or problems with predators eating these fish?
In terms, is the question referring to like the tags that we've put in them, or is it more on like mercury?
I believe so, yeah, with
okay.
Things that are being inserted into the fish.
Well, like you said, you mentioned, or the question mentioned that you're seeing heads of fish there. So, in particular, raptors usually catch the fish, take it somewhere, and then rip off the meat instead of eating it whole. So, for example, the fish that have the radio telemetry tags on them, that are a little bit bigger and may have a little bit of metals that would be not healthy for an animal to eat whole. Generally, though, at the same time, those tags are, they're encased in epoxy, so they're clearly quite waterproof and pretty well secured. So even digestive juices of what a fish would consume that tag, if they did, it would probably just go through their system, and they'd probably get rid of it without actually taking on any of the contaminations. But in most cases, animals, predators that might pick off some of those goldfish, they're going to eat the meat of the body, and that would probably mean that they throw off the radio tag. And the little pit tags, no, I'm not really worried about those. Those haven't been found to poison any upper predators, and pit tags have been used all over the place for a long time. So.
Okay.
And
Great.
Gail, I think if I can jump in for 1 second, I think another piece of the question was, is there any plans to use poison in the lake to kill the fish like rotenone? And at this time, we do not have any plans to do that.
Yeah, clearly more of a question for 9 Mile Creek staff, but my understanding was exactly what Erica said, that no, there's not plans to do that. In my opinion, rotenoning has to be a very, very last ditch effort, and because it actually has a potential to do exactly the opposite what the intention is, where it could kill 99.5% of the fish in the lake, but the only thing you didn't get was a handful of goldfish, and now there's nothing to check them at all, and then the lake will be only filled with goldfish. So that it's just risky, and it's tough to get to, and it's a last ditch effort, and we try to avoid it.
And Jordan, I'd like to jump in one last time too. That isn't anything that the watershed district could decide tomorrow that they wanted to do it and could actually go out and do it. It would be a tremendously long process that would involve the DNR and lakeshore owners You seldomly, I don't know if it's ever been done in an urban lake setting anyway, when it's almost 80% residential private property. But so it is not on our radar whatsoever.
Great. Well, thank you so much. If you do have more questions for Jordan, we're going to be moving on, but you can still type those in the chat and then I will send those to him later. And we can send the answers out to you as a follow-up email with the recording of this presentation. So Jordan, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
And thank you also to all of the volunteers who helped with all of this baiting and management, people who let us use their backyards. It was definitely a group effort. So very much appreciate all of your work with that. Okay, we're gonna move into our kind of second phase of the presentation here. So
As you're working on that, Gail, I see Marcy had a question on if a goal was to totally eliminate goldfish from Lake Nancy. And I think totally eliminating any population is probably outside of any possibility of goal. Our goal is, as Jordan had mentioned, is to get it underneath that 89 acres or pounds per acre. So it's not disrupting or providing internal issues for the lakes. And then stocking with game fish or the sunfish so they can help manage and eat the fry and the eggs and reduce recruitment. And even then would allow for some continual removals. And we're just managing a better fishery. We'd have a hard time eliminating or eradicating any aquatic invasive species.
yeah, thanks, Randy. Thanks for that clarification. I guess I'll just keep it going with you, Randy. Talk about
before I even start, I want to again thank everybody, our volunteers, everybody that's here. One other group I want to thank, and I only see 2 of our city staff on there, but on top of consultants and volunteers, we wouldn't be able to do the work that we do without our partners. I see Jessica Wilson from the City of Edina's on, and Leslie Stovering from City of Eden Prairie's on, and we're actually maybe getting close to the farewell for Leslie, because she's retiring here in a couple weeks. So thank you for attending this evening. And as mentioning our partnerships with the cities, just kind of highlight a couple things, projects and program things that we're going to be working on in 2022. And this is just to highlight a few and just go through a couple areas in the watershed. We'll start up in the Minnetonka area. So we are nearing completion of a water quality study on the Holiday, Wing, and Rose group of lakes. Results from this study, our water quality study update, and we've had some community input. We had a stakeholder meeting as we initiated the project. Input from that will help us decide our management options to improve the water quality and the overall health of the lakes. We will be scheduling another stakeholder meeting with the community to present findings and possible management alternatives, and all these potential projects and additional programs put in place to address the water quality will again improve the overall health of the lake, lead to improved habitat for wildlife and fish, and reduce problems from too many nutrients in the water, such as nuisance algal blooms, which we've been seeing throughout the Twin Cities metro area quite a bit over the last few years. Another project that we are getting started or evaluating is the whited marsh restoration. In 2020 and 21, the district undertook a study to identify its highest quality wetlands within our boundaries, and whited marsh in Minnetonka was identified as probably our highest or one of our top 4 or 5 quality wetlands that we have. And we're currently working on identifying potential management methods to protect and enhance the wetland or marsh. And following the review of this specific evaluation for whited marsh, we'll look to implement the identified management methods. And one of those things clearly could be management of invasive plant species in the buffer and within this floating mat wetland. Another area that we'll be looking includes a few more cities that we've been working with, but earlier in 2014 through 2019, we did a stream bank restoration project through our North Fork of 9 Mile Creek from Hopkins through Edina, just before Normandale Lake. And earlier this year, we're starting to look at the South Fork. So we assessed 3.3 miles of the South Fork through Minnetonka, Eden Prairie, Edina, and Bloomington to document channel conditions and problem areas. And we're now in the process of studying options to stabilize and restore roughly 6,000 linear feet to the creek through 5 priority reaches, with the hopes of implementing the projects in 2023 and 2024. There's still coordination with the cities. There are a few private parcels there, but this is going to be rather important too, because the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency lists a portion of the South Fork from Lake Smetana to Normandale Lake as impaired for overall biota or fish and macro invertebrates. And a common stressor for these biotic impairments is generally excessive sediments. Therefore, a project that will stabilize stream channels would directly benefit the biotic community of the creek and downstream water resources. Thank you again for Jordan for his presentation on goldfish management on Lake Cornelia. The district and the city of Edina have been undertaking a multi-phase project to improve the water quality and health of Lake Cornelia and Lake Edina. They're both listed as impaired by the MPCA, or the Pollution Control Agency, for excessive nutrients, generally phosphorus. So we've done a few things working with the city of Edina in the lake. We did an alum treatment. We're working on this carp management issue. Actually, I just want to point out that we did receive grant funds from Hennepin County AIS prevention grant to undertake some of this study work on goldfish, as we did for Clean Water Land and Legacy funds that for this continued study and evaluation. But and the alum and the goldfish work toward addressing some internal loading issues or nutrient loading going on in the lake when we lose oxygen. We also are looking at stormwater runoff or external sources to Lake Cornelia as to remediate or lessen that nutrient load coming into the lake. And one of those would be the Rosslyn Park stormwater filtration system. We're working with the city in Rosslyn Park, putting up a above ground filtration vault that will take runoff from part of a 410 acre urban sub-watershed that includes Southdale Mall area. All that water diverts to, you mentioned, Jordan mentioned Swimming Pool Pond. There's a pond right by the swimming pool in Edina, and that 410 acre sub-watershed ends up, all that stormwater running off ends up in the pond. This filtration system will actually divert water from the pond prior to it entering Lake Cornelia, and it will run it through 3 different medias. The water goes through a media, filtration media, and basically it strips nutrients out before it gets discharged back into Lake Cornelia. So we'll be pulling phosphorus out of that the algae used to grow. We'll be using the 3 different media and evaluating it over the next few years to determine which one has the most longevity, which one has the best removal efficiencies, so we can continually evaluate and optimize the system. This also, we received grant funds for. We have Hennepin County grant funds and more Clean Water Land and Legacy funds to the tune of about $850,000 for this. And this should be up and running early this spring as we, again, start our monitoring and continually twisting the knobs to make it as most efficient as we possibly can. I also mentioned Lake Edina. So Lake Edina is also impaired. So we've started to evaluate a project that we call the Linmar Basin Stormwater Retrofit in the Bristol Mayville Park area. That's a mouthful, but that's also a city-owned park. The project that we're looking at would enhance the existing park space and improve stormwater management. When we get to that point, as through our design, the results would have multiple benefits, including reducing stormwater runoff and associated flooding in the neighborhood, provide habitat enhancements, which would include increased plants diversity, pollinators, and we'd also incorporate educational components in that as well as we, as they look over this kind of, it basically would be a larger rain garden or infiltration basin that would hold more water than it currently does. We've actually just recently completed the study on that and the proposed on this proposed project, and it'll be presented at tomorrow evening's board meeting with our managers for them to hear. And then we have an upcoming public hearing on it scheduled for March 3rd to gather more comments about the project and the study from the public. And then the last one I was going to mention, many of you have heard about our Normandale Lake Water Quality Improvement Project plenty of times. We've been working in partnership with the City of Bloomington on this. It's a 6-year phased project. Being a shallow lake, we're trying to move slowly as we implement projects and evaluate how the results are going. So we're continuing to implement actions from our 2018 engineering report, again, to improve water quality and the ecological health of the lake. To this point, the district and the city have implemented several strategies. I'm sure you've heard plenty of them before: lake drawdown, in lake alum treatment. And again, throughout this project, we continue to implement an adaptive management approach of implementation, continued evaluation, and assessing of progress to determine if we need to consider additional management options to meet our goals. Beyond the projects we've already implemented on Normandale, in 2022, we'll continue to manage carp. Actually, WSB is also helping us do some fish management work on Normandale as well as on Lake Cornelia. And we'll also continue to monitor water quality and oxygen conditions throughout the lake. And after evaluating this monitoring data, following the completion of herbicide treatments in the lake to control curly-leaf pondweed, which can provide some internal issues with lake, we'll assess the need to improve oxygen conditions at that time. Depending on the results of each year, we do an annual plant survey, again, to attack the curly-leaf pondweed. We do these herbicide treatments, and we have those planned if needed up until 2024. And that could be either a whole lake treatment, which we haven't had to do yet, or it could be spot treatments just for the curly leaf beds, so we can try to manage them and have a healthier native plant community. That's all I have for, I think, what we have on our map there.
Great. Thank you so much, Randy, for providing that overview. As you can see, we've got quite a lot of projects going on into the future, and quite a few projects that we are also still maintaining. So we appreciate you spending this hour with us to learn about all of these projects that we're doing, and just really thank you again for being here and being so supportive of all the work that we're doing. You really are part of the solution, and you help make our work successful. So thank you so much for staying here. Hope to see you at a future program, or maybe out on the lake as we're out and about. This concludes our formal program for tonight, but if you do have a burning question that you want to ask in front of the big group, staff and managers will stay on a little bit at the end to answer your questions. Otherwise, Randy Anhorn's contact information is down below. You can certainly feel free to email or call with any questions that you have. And we will send this recording out, as well as any answers that didn't get answered from Jordan's presentation. So thank you very much. Have a great night.
And Gail, I have one more thing. Hopefully next year we can have this in person. We probably said that last year as well. we could probably, it'd be nice, you know, have a little longer event where people can stand around afterwards, talk to people, have some cookies and some lemonade. And next year is, you know, our calendar. So hopefully next winter or spring, we can celebrate those that will be, their work will be shown on our calendar.
That would be awesome. I miss getting together in person with everybody, but keep a lookout for those calendars and for the photo contest too. So we'll hope to see you in some of those. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
you. Good night.
Thanks, Leslie.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Marcy. A lot of thank yous coming in the chat. So great job, Jordan. Thanks again.
Yeah, sure. It was great. Glad it went over well. And if people have more questions, you feel free to send out my contact information too. And
Sounds good.
and if anybody wants to
Yeah,
get hold of me.
I think we have some people staying on here. Any questions from those folks?
No, just a big thank you. Good night.
Thanks, Roger. Have a good one. Okay, we do have one phone number on here as well. I'm not sure if that person can unmute or wants to ask a question, but feel free. Or not. Okay. I believe that is all for public, so we can probably stop recording, whoever is doing that.